Hi, I'm John Kursky, and in part 3 of making you an AI-enabled Power BI developer, I'm going to show you how to leverage GitHub Copilot and the Power BI Modeling MCP server to make a change to a model. Before we get started, don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel so you can stay up to date on all the new features with Power Query Lint, as well as stay up to speed on all the new parts of this series we'll be putting out in the coming months. And with that, let's talk a little bit about where we were in part 2 and where we are going to go in part 3. In part 2, I showed you how to set up PBIP and start working with GitHub Copilot to make changes to the contents. More specifically, I showed you how to comment the Power Query code. In today's part, what we're going to go over is I want to introduce you to the Power BI Modeling MCP server so that we can make changes to a Power BI file that we have up and also save those appropriately so that we can make the changes to our production system. And there's a couple of extensions that we're going to use and a couple of terms that I'm going to use throughout the rest of this so-called lesson. The first is I'm going to use the word MCP. MCP stands for Model Context Protocol. Model Context Protocol is a relatively new protocol that was introduced by Anthropic a little over a year ago. And this is a way for large language models like those that we use in GitHub Copilot to interact with APIs or remote calls and get back data in a more consistent manner so that it could then be shown to us in the chat interface. The second term I'm going to use is branches. Branches are going to be related to Git. A branch is an isolated area or version of your Power BI code, in this case, that you can keep separate from your production version, which is the main branch. And at that point, when you're ready to merge those changes, we're going to do something, the third term, which is a pull request. And a pull request is a kind of a ask for permission to take the changes I have here in my branch, working branch, and merge that into my main branch. All right, so up on my screen here, I've got Visual Studio Code up, and in the bottom left-hand corner, the first thing we're going to do is I'd like to get off of the main branch, which is my production branch, and switch over to a different branch. Now, there's different branching methodologies, but what I'm going to do here is a very simple one where I'm going to branch off of main, give it my last name, and then when anybody else is looking in the environment that I've synced to GitHub, they can see that's the work I'm doing currently. There's different naming strategies, but let's keep it simple for the purpose of this lesson. So I'm going to go down here. I'm going to click on main. I'm going to create a new branch, and I'm going to give it just my last name. All right, notice now at the bottom here, it's got a couple icons. First, it tells me what branch I'm currently in, and then second, there's this little upload icon. When I created this branch only exists in my local repository on my machine. If I want to make this branch available for others to make edits to or review, that little icon indicates I need to publish that branch. We'll get to that here in a second, but it's good to know that this is not necessarily visible to anybody just yet. All right, now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click on extensions, and there's two extensions that I want to introduce you to. The first is GitHub pull requests. Make sure you install this one. This helps manage pull requests in Visual Studio Code, so you don't need to necessarily go to another browser to do that. And the next one is the Power BI Modeling MCP server. Now I've already installed this, but this is a relatively new MCP server that lets us use the chat feature to interact with the semantic model that we have open or that we have as a folder in PBIP. For today's purpose, I'm going to show you what it's like when you have the Power BI report open on your desktop and how you can interact with it with this MCP server. So once you have those installed, we're going to move over to the GitHub Copilot agent. And we're going to make one assumption here. You have already opened the Power BI report, the PBIP report that we have here. So if I was to right click and reveal in File Explorer, I can double click on this and it will open up the file, which I already have open. The next thing I'm going to do is open up my chat window here. Now, if it's not open by default, you can always go up to the top, click on chat, and we want to make sure we're in agent mode because the agent mode is going to allow us to interact with any of the tools, MCP, that are provided through MCP to make sure that we can utilize those. Now, once I have it turned to agent mode, I'll pick the model of my choice. I'm going to use Claude Sonnet for the purpose of this demonstration. And then configure tools. When I click on configure tools, I want to make sure that the Power BI modeling MCP is checked. Otherwise, when I'm interacting with the chat feature, I will not be able, or the chat feature will not be able to leverage the components that are, or the tools that are available in the MCP server provided here. Now, quick aside, there is quite a few other ones over time that you might interact with. Some are built in, which I would normally recommend don't turn off because they help with the execution. But if you start adding in other ones, like I have the Azure MCP or Playwright, you may want to, in the scope of your work, turn off these other ones. Now, the reason you may want to do that is as the agent mode is responding to your commands or your questions, it's going to go through a lot of these tools. And we want to make sure that it's only going through the tools that we really need it to do. Otherwise, it's going to increase the amount of time and the number of calls that it might try to make in order to fulfill your command or your question. And time, it is a concern here. You want to make sure that we're, as an AI-enabled Power BI developer, we're trying to make ourselves more efficient. So this is a way that you can be more efficient. Try to minimize the number of MCP tools that you have turned on when you're working in this workspace. So I have that turned on. So the next thing I'm going to do is type in a very simple command called connect to sample model in Power BI desktop. And I'm going to hit send. Now at this point, you're going to see some prompts. And depending on if you've used the Power BI modeling MCP server before, it might ask for some permissions. Now this is a kind of a secure way to indicate like, hey, I'm going to do something on your system. Is that all right? Now in this case, what the MCP server is doing is it wants to list all the open connections in Power BI Desktop that I have. When Power BI Desktop is open, there's actually a local version of SSAS running, which is SQL Server Analysis Services. And so what it's looking for is a port to connect to on the machine. So I'm going to hit allow. You can also say allow in this session, allow in this workspace. I'm going to say allow in this session. That way I'm not having to click allow a bunch of times. All right, now it found an MCP or a Power BI desktop instance and it's connected to that port. So at this point, I have the ability to use this chat interface to work with the Power BI desktop file that I have open. Now in the link below, I've got a link to the GitHub page for this Power BI modeling MCP server of all the different kind of commands and tools that are available. But let's go over a scenario in which I want to make some edits to the model. More specifically, I want to create a measure, and I want to iterate through creating a measure around date, time, and time zones. Now, in the Power BI desktop, I don't have a measures table. Now, let's say I want to create a measures table. So at this point, connected to the Power BI desktop through the MCP, and it's going to now try to create a measures table. And again, you'll see here, it's going to ask from a table operations perspective, can I create this? And I'm going to say, allow in this session. And it might ask me, is it okay? Again, I'm going to hit yes. Over time, if you've got this and you've allowed this, set the permissions, you'll get less of these prompts. But it's good to know that it's asking for permission to make some changes to your system. All right, now it says that it's done so, and if I go back, you'll see now I have a measures table. I didn't create that through the low code feature. It is now doing that through the measures table through the MCP. Now, I want to create a new measure so that I can show kind of what the current selected time zone is. So what I'd like to do now is, how about let's create a new measure that gets the current date and time. And you'll notice I've got it's created something called measure group, which is the column. I'm going to ask it, and then hide the measure group column in measures. So with the Claude Sonnet, now it's kind of interpreted my request. Now it wants to create a definition. I'm going to say yes. I'm going to say yes for the column operation that I want to hide that column. Now if I go back to Power BI desktop, you'll see that column's hidden. And if I click here, it's saying current date time now. All right. So the next thing we want to do, I want to create a time zone table so that when folks select the time zone of their preference, I want it to show the time in the time zone that they've selected. So I'm going to type this in and say create a time zone table and update current date time measure to factor in the selected value of the time zone. Now at this point, I'm going to hit enter. And it is now kind of interpreting how it needs to create the time zone table. I'm going to say allow. Looks like it was trying to figure out how to create the date table. Now it wants to list the operations so it can figure out how to set up everything. Ooh, that's a lot. So let's allow in this session, allow, allow. Now it wants to update the measure. Okay, so if we go back, you'll see now it added a time zone table. And that time zone table is a calculated table. Maybe not something I would always do, but it's a good start, and I can always swap it out with maybe a Power Query table. And it's done not all the time zones that I would use, but at least me on the East Coast of the U.S., those are good enough for probably the audience that I'm going to work with. Now, at this point, if I was to open up a new tab and I want to create a card and put in the current time, oop, guess it didn't like that. Oh, I need to refresh the calculated tables. There we go. All right, so at this point, I'm looking at current date and time. It is figuring out what the selected time zone offset is, and current UTC. That could be a problem. It's using the now function, but it is adjusting the time zone, doing the division by 24, which is nice. So there's a couple things that I'd like to make changes to. The first thing is I want to make sure that when I put in filter on all pages, I can put it on Eastern time zone. But notice it's not putting the actual time here. Now what I can do is I can go back and paste in a message like this. Current date and time is showing just the date. I need it in the AM, PM format too. And it wants to make an update to the measure. Okay, now if I go back, you'll see now it's put it in the format that I want it, but it's still, I've selected Eastern time, and it's definitely not 4:55 in the morning. One of the issues I see, and I can just make this change myself, is I want to switch this over to UTC now. That's more like it. Now, I can hit save. And if I go back to Visual Studio, you'll notice in the source control area, it's picked up on all the changes I've made. I created that new tab. I created a new visual. I've also created the new tables in the model. There's a new measures table, and there's a new time zone table. At this point, I want to save this locally and commit globally. So what I'm going to do is make sure I've added measures table. Make sure you put in a message in the commit. Otherwise, if you hit commit without any description, it's just going to hang. So good tip. Hit commit. I'm going to publish the branch. So at this point, I've committed locally. Nobody knows about this, this branch just yet. I'm going to hit publish. Now it's going to be up on my GitHub site. All right, so if I'm okay with these changes and I want to merge them now into my production branch, because I have it isolated in my branch here, I've allowed AI to make changes. I can have other people review those changes, but I'm also have the ability that I haven't really impacted production yet. But if I'm happy with those changes, I've tested those changes, and I'm ready to move that into the main version of my Power BI file, I can create something called a pull request. Now, I've added that GitHub pull request extension, which makes this really nice. I don't need to go to another interface. I can click the GitHub icon here. Up at the top, I can create a pull request. And the base is main, and I want to merge Kursky into that. And notice that it's already put in what the measure table is. I can put it in description, updated measures table, and added new date time zone handling. All right, and then Copilot, well, it shows the files that are changed here, and then I can actually create the pull request at this point. I hit the create button. And for other folks working with this or doing a review, they can see this pull request, and then they can either check out, or I'm sorry, they can either review it, merge it, or put in comments to say, hey, can you make some minor changes to this? Pull requests are a great way to kind of have a review process to make sure things aren't going sideways before you merge into production. Now, if I merge this pull request, It's going to create a merge commit. And I can then, it says pull request successfully merged. Now I could either delete my current branch, but that's the one I'm on, but I can also switch over to main here if I want to. If I switch to main, it's important to note that if I still have Power BI Desktop open, I want to close it and reopen it again, because the changes that have been made are in the files for PBIP, and I don't want to cause any conflict with it. So it's good to close down Power BI Desktop when you're doing a pull request. And if you're going to switch a branch, close that instance and then switch over your branch and then open the file back up. So here in this case, what I'm going to do is close this. I'm going to switch over to main. Sync. Now I can reveal in File Explorer again. Open up the file. And you'll notice the changes in the main branch are the same as what I had in the Kursky branch. All right, so I hope you learned something today. What we went over was using GitHub Copilot, the Power BI modeling MCP, as well as pull requests to work through a process of making a change to a model, doing it safely in an isolated branch, and then doing a pull request to merge those changes in production. All right, in our next video, I want to take a deeper dive into GitHub Copilot and the different type of agents that you can use so you can start parallelizing your work. But in the meantime, I hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you.